Well, it's so good to be back. Thank you all for joining this session. And again, just like last session, I do hope that this is an interactive session. Feel free to unmute your mic and share some thoughts and comments. And if you're not comfortable with that, put it in the chat box and I'll read it for you. I really want this to be a learning experience, that we learn how to use the SMART tools so that you can help individuals that you're working with and share those tools with them, because they are very effective and can really make a difference in a family or dynamics and relationship. So, all right. So just to review a little bit from last week, we had, okay. Just to review the acronyms, just in case some of you weren't here last week, but LO will stand for loved one, and that is a individual with the substance use or alcohol use disorder. CSO stands for concerned significant other. That's a family, partner, spouse, friend of a loved one. And then craft resources, we talked about those last week, but those are strategies that are specifically focused for the CSO to use to help build a relationship and better respond to the situation with their loved one. And it stands for community reinforcement and family training. And then just in case you're not familiar with the SMART acronym, that stands for self-management and recovery training. To just briefly talk about how, and just remind individuals, in case you weren't here last week, what is the difference between SMART recovery and the other mutual support groups that you're familiar with. SMART does believe in the power to change addictive behavior resides within each individual and doesn't depend on adherence to a spiritual viewpoint. So the use of religious or spiritual beliefs or practices in recovery is certainly a personal choice. They believe that individuals have the power of choice and they're not powerless over their life or their decisions that they make. And they do support the use of medication to treat addictions and any other psychiatric disorders. They strongly discourage use of labels such as disease, alcoholic, enabler, codependent, addict. Those words they find are very damaging and harmful to relationship building. And then they also encourage people to attend meetings for as long as the strategies are learned, not necessarily a lifetime. And at SMART, they believe that each individual will find their own path for change. And for some, that path may include also attending a 12-step program like AA or NA. And while the SMART approach is different in some ways than the 12-step, it doesn't exclude them. So we have a lot of participants that come to SMART recovery meeting as well as one of the 12-step programs. So SMART does have this 4-point program system, and that is the heart of the program. And each point provides tools and techniques and strategies that can help those on the recovery side, as well as those CSOs reach their goals. And this 4-point system is the same for loved ones and CSOs. It's just been adapted to meet the needs of the CSO. So last week I had a question about how do I find these meetings, especially if I want to find a meeting like for family and friends or some particular type of meeting. So there is a link, and I think Chris or Molly will share that in the chat box. And this is, you get onto this link and then click on find a free meeting. And then you can select filters, like I want a family and friends meeting and I want it on Wednesdays or something like that, or I want it online. So whatever your filter is, and then hit the apply button, and then up will come all the meetings that are available for you to attend. Now, just an FYI that SMART is rolling out in this next month or so. They're going to allow all their meetings, including the ones that are online. Currently right now, the online meetings can only be accessed if you register as a SMART recovery member. And it's just a simple registration process of giving your name and your email. There's no other requirements, but they're finding that may be a barrier to people attending meetings. So like right now, if you get onto that link, my meeting isn't on that because I'm part of the SMART Recovery online meeting that I facilitate each week. But here shortly, they are going to open all these meetings up. So there's no barriers at all, no registration process at all. And so you'll see definitely an increase in the availability of meetings available to individuals. So there is also different types of recovery meeting too. So not only for recovery and family and friends, but for special interest groups too, and other behavioral situations besides just substance use. So again, you can use these filters if you're looking for specific meetings, but a wide variety of options that they do offer at Smart Recovery to help individuals. Last week too, I had a question about facilitator training and what does it take and what do you need to do to become a facilitator? And here's the link that Molly just shared in the chat box. And so you'll get the information on how to sign up and register. It is a $99 registration fee, but don't be fearful of that because there are scholarships, several types of scholarships that you can apply for. So to decrease that fee. And there's also group rates available. So if several of you wanted to get together and do this training together, it would be cheaper than that $99 fee. So don't let that scare you. There are options out there to assist and help you if you want to become a facilitator. And they do welcome and encourage people to do that. And just on a similar note here, there was a question about, what are the requirements to leading a Smart Recovery meeting, and do you have to be in recovery? So being a facilitator is open to everyone with or without a recovery history. So there's no requirement that you have to be in recovery to facilitate a meeting. They just ask that you are stable in your recovery process. They do require that the individual has been attending SMART meetings for at least a minimum of 3 months, mainly because they want to be familiar with the layout and the way the SMART meetings are run. So once you register for becoming a facilitator, you will be given this training course, and it's online, it's self-paced, so you do it at your leisure and when it's convenient for you. And they just ask that you finish it within a 6-month time frame from the time that you register. So, and then once you complete that training course, then you will take 2 training sessions after that. The first training session will be like a role play session. So what they do is trainees, facilitators, come in and they present a scenario, and then you role play how you would carry that out in a meeting and how you would apply a SMART tool. So you practice doing that and get feedback from the experienced facilitators. And then the second training is how to lead an effective SMART recovery meeting. So going over some basic guidelines, how to handle difficult situations and things like that. So very helpful, and they really want you well prepared. If you want to be a trainer, I thought they did a great job, facilitators, I thought they did a great job in their training and tried to make you feel very confident in carrying out this role. And then the neat thing about Smart Recovery is after you've done these trainings and you started your own meeting, they offer ongoing support. So they have, and it's weekly too. So if you want to pop in and think, something happened at my meeting and I don't know if I handled that correctly, you can come to this training meeting and ask these questions and get some input on, what you did right or wrong, or, some suggestions on how to improve. And plus they always have different topics going on. So it's really helpful. So there's always support there. So if you feel that calling to be a facilitator, I would say go ahead with it. And it's been such a rewarding experience. And I know I shared last week that, I facilitate a online family and friends meeting, and I do that each Wednesday evening. And it has been so rewarding carrying out these meetings. I've learned so much doing it, not, just from the tools that I share, but also from the participants that come to the meeting. And I really can't say enough about Smart Recovery and being a facilitator. It's been a great experience. So I encourage you to do that too. Okay, so I had a question about what is the criminal justice system understanding of Smart Recovery, and do the SMART meetings count towards meeting support group requirements? And Molly, I do have a link for that if you wouldn't mind sharing that in the chat box. So for many years, Smart Recovery has worked with correctional institutions throughout the United States, and they provide Smart Recovery meetings for incarcerated individuals, as well as support meetings for those returning to the communities. And they have this program called Inside Out Correctional Program. So it is based on the 4 points Smart Recovery System, just like all the other meetings. But this program is specifically designed for those individuals in drug courts or jails or prisons or DUI diversion programs and related aftercare. And I don't think, and if someone knows differently in this session, let me know. I don't think anyone in Kentucky is carrying out this Inside Out program, but I do know several criminal legal system in Indiana are, and they have these programs going throughout the state. And I've talked to them, and they find that this is very valuable to do in their criminal legal system. And they worked with the incarcerated individuals and found much success. So I thought the program was really good. I don't know a whole lot about the program, never carried it out. I have seen their materials, and they feel like it's really been a help. So I also did ask our implementation facilitators to try on our HEAL team to try to get the feedback from them about what the criminal justice system understanding of SMART is here in Kentucky. And they said drug courts were very accepting of SMART recovery meetings, and they have had no resistance at all. They have no experience of resistance. So it was great to hear that too. So just keep in mind that anyone that attends a SMART recovery meeting, there is a process and you can get a verification of attendance, and that can be shared with whoever you have to share it with. And that will count as that you attended that meeting. Also keep in mind that courts do have to offer a non-faith-based option. That was based on a ruling in 2007 that said any practice of requiring individuals involved in the criminal justice system to attend a 12-step meeting must also offer a non-faith-based option or be subject to liability. The next question that came in, do SMART meeting members graduate? Is there a process for stopping SMART? So there's not a graduation for SMART recovery, and there's not the awarding of chips for a certain amount of sober days or the requirement of having a sponsor. So that's some of the differences from the mutual support groups. And the length of time that an individual will attend a SMART meeting really depends on that person. So it'll come a time that person says, you know what, I've learned these strategies. I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. I see the benefits of changing. I have no desire to go back to my old ways of doing things. And it really isn't a benefit for me to come to these meetings anymore. And they kind of determine their own graduation. And they're always welcome, to come back and join the meetings if they want to, or if they stop maybe using some of the SMART tools. But they just determine that on their own. And I really enjoy when I've had participants come into a meeting for long periods of time, and then they've stepped away for a couple of years, and then they've come back. And I always like to see them back in my meetings because they can provide an update. And it's really helpful because they share what SMART recovery has done for them and how positive their life has become and the changes that were made, so they can become an inspiration and a motivation, especially for our new folks. So it's always good to see them, back in the meetings. And then I get an update too on how they're doing. So the next question coming in was, how does SMART family and friends participant ease into the new way of communicating with their loved one after having months or years of tense interactions, nagging, lack of boundaries, lies, fights, etc.? And there is usually a good deal of defensive baggage and trust issues on both sides. I love this question, and it really is a great question. They probably can spend the entire session just on this one, but the short answer here is build the relationship with the loved one. The loved one needs to see the CSO as their support person, not a person that they're constantly battling arguments with and every day. They need to go to see that person, that they can go to that person as support. So the first step would be for that CSO to do a self-analysis of their own behavior. Last week, I talked about how important it was for them to hit the pause button, and reflect and not react. So what they would have to do here is, step back and look at, analyze how often do they negatively talk to their loved one? How often do they criticize them, shame and blame them, try in an attempt to try to change their behavior, nag them, tell them what to do or how to live their life? If they could just stop those things, that would be a great first step. That would make a huge difference in that relationship. And sometimes, they don't believe that that's true, but it really is. But for some CSOs, that can be very difficult. They've been responding this way for a number of years. But once they see the benefits of making these changes, and then they start to see the loved one making some positive changes, they'll start to see that relationship become healthier. And they will come to a point and realize, wow, I have spent a number of years responding to this situation in a very ineffective way. And the way I was responding was not helpful at all. And it can be really an aha moment for that individual. So encouraging them to make these changes. And yes, they can't make all of them, in one day, but start on that path. And they will see as they start to do one change, they can make another change, and they'll start to gain confidence in their ability to carry this out. And also a reminder to them that this is going to take time. When a person is known as the nagger or the one that's always starting a fight or disrespectful of boundaries, that's going to take time for another person to change their opinion of that person. But with consistent change of behavior and them staying on the course, they will start to see that person is committed to change, and the trust relationship will build. Trust, and I mention this a lot in my meetings, is something that person determines on their own when to trust again. And when trust again is time is needed, and to see the consistency of new behaviors being carried out. Nobody can force another person, to trust them. So that's kind of a more direct way of answering that question. And the second thing I would have to say here is that trying to make positive statements whenever possible. This is what we call reinforcing positive behaviors, getting that microscope out if you have to, even if it's just maybe good morning, or just smiling. That can be impactful. But I think so many times the CSO has that lens that only sees the negative behavior. So if they can open up their view and their perspective to look at those ways that the loved one is doing some positive things, that can be so helpful for that loved one to see that and hear those comments. And for them not to underestimate how powerful those comments are. So hopefully today, the exercises that we do will be helpful in assisting the CSOs to respond differently. And really the ball is in the CSO's court. They have the influence to impact that loved one's path to recovery by changing the way they're responding to the situation. It really does come down to attitude. They need to realize that they need to change just as much as the loved one needs to change their behavior. And that may be hard for them to hear. So I've had participants come to my meeting, newbie type folks, and they did not like that message that they needed to change, because in their minds, it's the loved one that has the problem and they need to change, not them. And that can be hard for them to hear. And sometimes they walk away from the meetings for a while until they reflect on their situation. And then when it doesn't improve, they come back and then they're more open to hearing about things that they can do. So great question, whoever sent that in. Thank you. All right, so I thought I'd spend, a bulk of today's session just going over some various scenarios, typical scenarios that you are familiar with working with CSOs, and helping them work through these smart tools, and so that they can change the way they respond to their loved one. So for this scenario, we have the CSO saying, I'm afraid you are going to be fired again. This is the third time this month that you have called in sick because you were under the influence. And the loved one responding, you worry too much. I won't get fired. I'm a good worker. And then the CSO responding, well, I think you need help to get help. Your using is getting out of hand and it is draining us financially. And of course, the loved one responding with, stop nagging me. I am fine and I don't need help. So based on last week, we talked about the stages of change. What do you think this loved one currently is in? Which stage of change? Feel free to unmute your mic or throw it in the chat box, whatever you're comfortable with. What stage of change? Think about the things the loved one's saying here. I'm fine, I don't need help. That's a clue. You're right, Linda. Pre-contemplation. Remember, last week we talked about pre-contemplation is not really that the person's in denial, but the person just sees, I'm fine. I've got things under control. I don't think I need to change. I like my life as it's going right now. And, maybe the only problem is that you are nagging me too much to change. So, and so we kind of reviewed what would be good at this stage now when they're not seeing any need to make a change. What would be, here we go. What would be some effective strategies that you would recommend for this CSO to carry out? What would be helpful when you have a loved one that, just doesn't see the need to change at all? What would be helpful? What could you encourage the CSO that you're working with, or the one that that's dealing with the situation? What would you have them do? Again, feel free to unmute your mic or share them in the chat box. Cost benefit analysis. Yes, I agree, Linda. Yep, reviewing that tool, and we are going to do that here in a few minutes. That's great. Any other techniques that we talked about last week you can think of that could be helpful? Someone that doesn't want to change or doesn't see, the need to change, but you're looking at building the relationship. So let me share here some strategies, because you're not going to get them to change because in their mind, they don't need to change, but you would like to start building that relationship with your communication. Remember last week we talked about those techniques using the PIUS and the LOVE acronym, because all those are all geared towards building the relationship, communicating better, and stop telling the person what to do and being more respectful. And that can be very helpful. Remember, we talked about the allowing for the natural consequences. So letting that person experience, because of their actions, they need to feel the responsibility of that. So they need to figure out how to pay that electric bill because they use their money for substances, or they need to address their manager at work because they slept over and they didn't set their alarm, or they ignored their alarm. Things like that can be very helpful in them experiencing some discomfort and experiencing the downsides of using substances instead of somebody protecting them. Healthy boundaries are very important. So when that person is not comfortable, or they feel like their personal space is being violated, or their emotional well-being is being impacted, absolutely establish those healthy boundaries and let the person know, so that they know that this is off limits. Talked about just earlier about the importance of letting them know when they see positive behaviors, because that will reinforce in the loved one's mind, I'm going to do that again. I got a positive response in the past, and I'll do that again. And asking maybe those motivational interviewing questions like, any thoughts of changing, or what would be your concerns about changing behaviors, or maybe I'd be interested to hear the benefits you're receiving from your substance use so I can understand it better. Those are all helpful. Anything non-threatening, non-judgmental, using those active listening skills that comes with the communication techniques, those are helpful. You want to focus in on building the relationship, because you can't focus on the change right now, because that's not where they are in that process. What would be some ineffective ways, some things that would cause, arguments, or not motivate that loved one to make any changes at all? What do you know at this point that is not going to work and you wouldn't recommend a CSO doing? Well, one thing, trying to get them to change, or telling them they need to change. That we know it's not going to work. It would never work. Arguing, yes, surely. And condemnation, very good. Thank you for those comments, because that's true. That's only going to make the situation worse, and our loved one is going to kick in their heels and start defending themselves and become very defensive, because both sides are trying to say, I'm right, and they're proving a point, and no progress will be made that way. Enabling, yes, Bethany, other good point. And that goes along with allowing them to experience the natural consequences. That can be extremely helpful, so that loved one sees, boy, this is painful. There are a lot of downsides. I'm not sure how I'm going to pay my mortgage or my rent, because now I've used this money for the substances, and them coming to that conclusion instead of running to the CSO to say, help me now. I'm in a situation that I don't know how to get out. Threatening too is another technique that's often used, but it is very ineffective. So trying to encourage the CSOs that you work with to not make the threatening statements. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to and looked at the scenario from the loved one's perspective as it goes on. So I'm not sure I have a substance use problem. I feel bad that I got a DUI last week, but this is my first one. I know my partner was really upset with me, but I hate my job, and using helps me relax. So based on the statements that loved one just said, I know it's just a few statements, what do you think their stage of change is? What would you say they are in which stage of change? Key here is, I'm not sure. Right. Contemplation, Bethany, you are absolutely right, because they're not saying I don't have a problem. They're saying I'm not sure. So there's a little bit of hint of doubt, maybe, but maybe not. They're feeling bad that they got the DUI, so they had an uncomfortable experience. They don't like that their partner is upset, but they're also thinking, but there's a benefit to me using. It helps me relax. So this is really kind of a person that's in contemplation. Any thoughts of any questions would be appropriate to ask the loved one to help them reflect on their situation. Think about the motivating interviewing type questions. Again, feel free to use your mic too. It's sometimes easier than trying to type it all out. But, things like, any thoughts about changing your behavior, or do you have any concerns about your substance use? That could get someone just to start talking and reflecting. Maybe they won't share a whole lot, but they may be internally reflecting on that, and that could be helpful. So the tool that may help in this situation, and I think it was Linda earlier talked about, the SMART tool that may help, is the cost benefit analysis tool. And this is a great tool, if you remember from last week, is when somebody is kind of on the fence maybe they need to make some changes, but not convinced that they need to really make a change. Some situations have occurred that's uncomfortable, but they doubt that there's going to be any benefit to changing. So they're really not sure. So the CBA tool is an excellent tool to work with whoever you're working with to help them reflect on some costs and benefits of them continuing on that same path that they're doing versus the costs and benefits of trying to make those changes. And this, again, this tool can be very powerful because again, like I said last week, it has to be seen visually. So they need to write this on paper or a Word document on their computer would be fine, but they really need to look at this and see the costs and benefits of each situation. So typically, the cost of using or continuing to use, feel free to share in the chat box, but a lot of, common ones are financial problems, legal problems, fighting with the partner. There's a ton, this list can go on. And of course, it will be specific to each individual case, but having them share what those costs are and letting them reflect on the things. They may have missed a child's, sporting event and felt bad about it. Things like that, if they can personalize those costs, that can be helpful in getting them to change behavior. And then have them really look at, why do they continue to use substances? What benefit do they get from that? And this is important because they need to, really reflect on and really discuss why they continue to use and the benefits they get, because maybe there's alternatives once they establish that and kind of announce those benefits. So again, after they look at this whole list, then you would ask them, well, what could you see? What if you did stop using? Any concerns, or what cost do you see to stopping using? Have them reflect on that. What would be your worry if you stopped using? And, again, I just put a couple up here, but there's a lot more than just this list. Of course, many of them that use to relax, of course, they would be afraid of return of stress and anxiety or fear of losing control or what they may say or do, because that substance has provided that type of benefit. Loss of friends, because that's who they hang out with. And where else would they go? Where else would they get their social interaction? Those are real concerns and need to be addressed. And then having them reflect, of course, on the benefits. If you stopped, what benefits could you see in stopping using? And again, it'll be specific to the situation, but hopefully they will see that these benefits, certain of stopping, outweigh, the costs that they have of using. And they would just, put this list again. Remember, walking them through this exercise can be very impactful and can be that aha moment for that individual to say, I know what I need to do, and I need to try to make these changes. All right, let's move on to looking at the same scenario, but from a CSO's perspective. I'm very angry with my loved one that got a DUI last week. My partner often calls in sick to work. I know they're going to get fired. I'm working additional hours out of fear that my partner will lose their job. Tired of nagging and pleading with them to change. But I'm afraid if I don't say anything, that situation will get worse. So based on these comments, what do you think this CSO is currently in which stage of change? Contemplation. Yes, definitely correct. Because they're saying, I'm tired of nagging and pleading. There's a lot of fear going on. They're upset. And they know something has to change. they're well aware of that. So again, the SMART tool that would be effective is that cost benefit analysis at this stage too. And helping them through, just like we helped the CSO through their situation, it works the same way, but have them look at something specific that they would like to stop doing. Is it nagging or pleading or rescuing or yelling, whatever it is, try to keep it to one behavior, because when it's several different types of behavior that may become too overwhelming and they may not be able to go through this exercise. So they look at, I know my nagging is not helping at all. I really want to change that. So, and having them reflect on, what are the common reasons that they continue the cost of nagging. Certainly common to many CSOs, and of course there'll be specific ones. And the more specific that they can get, it's going to be more beneficial to that person. And what benefits, they feel more in control, or that helps release their anger when they start to nag. And they feel like, they have to tell the loved one what they're doing wrong. And then again, helping them reflect on what concerns would you have if you stop nagging? What would be those concerns? Maybe the situation will get worse if they don't hear me saying this over and over again, or I feel like I'll have lost control and they'll do whatever, so really, listing those out can be very valuable to the person trying to make this change. And then lastly, but very importantly, having them perceive what benefit could you see from if you stop nagging. The improved relationship, the motivation for the loved one to seek treatment options, and hopefully this list is pretty extensive, and that it becomes very obvious and another aha moment for that person to say, I have to change. I'm really convinced that me stopping nagging is the way to go. And this can happen with this tool. It's really, really effective, simple to use. And again, like I said last week, it's not a quick exercise. People can't come up with these answers in 5 minutes. They need to spend time and reflect on it, add to the list, so that when it's complete, they know exactly what they need to do. Okay, we'll move on here and look at another scenario, or continuing on with the same scenario from the CSO. I understand that all my yelling and attempting to control the situation, my loved one's not helping. I'm tired of the constant fights, and my partner has become increasingly agitated and defensive. I really do want a healthy relationship, and I'm open to options that may help. What do you think this CSO's stage of change is currently in right now? What are your thoughts here? What are they showing signs? Almost to action, Jamie. You're right. They're ready to make steps. So, and that is so true. So they're ready to change things. So they're convinced. They know, because they've said, I'm tired of the constant fights, and I am open to options that may help. So right before action, they do need to plan how they're going to do that, so that they can carry these out in the action phase. And so that change plan worksheet is a tool that really does help those individuals that know they need to make a change. Remember, they do need to know that they're convinced that, nagging in that previous scenario is they need to make that change, or, in this situation that they want this healthy relationship and they're tired of the fighting, whatever it is, they know it has to change. So they put together a plan to make this change. So the change plan worksheet is very effective, and you can walk through with your CSO that you're working with to help them fill this out. So I did, again, share the scenario so to help you remember what the CSO said. But the first step is for them to identify the changes that they need to make. So based on this scenario, what would be an appropriate change? Any thoughts? What is the CSO saying they're tired of? All right, moving on here, I will share.
They're tired of
Oh,
yelling.
go ahead, Christy. Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry. They're
Yeah,
really exhausted from yelling and realizing that nagging and yelling is not helping the situation, or their love, their LO, are themselves.
perfect. Thank you for sharing that. You're absolutely right. And they would just list these, everything, I want to stop telling my loved one to do. I want to stop yelling. I want to stop complaining. So, and they would list them all out, as many as there are. And so that they have a clear picture of how they want to change. Remember last week, we talked about doing that mini assessment on themselves, how confident and how important they feel like they can make this change. And that's just good for their own self-evaluation to see how important this is and how confident they can make this change. And then have them list why. Why are these reasons of this change important? What are some of the reasons? And this is very important. And so the things like, what is the goal here, basically? I want this healthy relationship. The CSO is saying this in the scenario. And I want to be that positive influence, because I know when I'm a positive influence, my loved one will respond differently, and hopefully listen to some of my thoughts of that I would be wanting to share. So they really need to spell that out. And then the next step is the steps that they need to take to carry out this plan. So remember, this change plan worksheet serves as their guide, kind of their playbook, because when they can follow this, they will carry out these behaviors and this change more effectively than if they kind of didn't have this guide. And just, I'll do it, I'll change. But if you don't have a plan, you probably won't carry that out effectively. So that's why this is so important, to work through with the individual to help them make these changes. So things like, what are they going to specifically do to carry out this change? Maybe I'll walk away when I see my loved one doing something irritable, or I'm not going to bring up any opinions or statements about what my loved one should do with their decisions in life. And I'm not going to share my thoughts or opinions unless my loved one asks for it. So these should be fairly detailed, so that the loved one can carry these, or the CSO would know how to carry these out. And then identifying people that can help them through this change. This is important, because they need to know who to go to, because there will be struggles. There will be difficult moments. So they need to know how to carry this out, and, support groups, family, friends, identifying those people so they have it on their list, so they know who to call. And then having them reflect on, how do they know their plan is going to work? What are they going to see in themselves that they know their plan is working? And having them identify that. Things like, I'm not going to no longer yell at my loved one, or I will be saying something when I see myself saying something positive each day, or I'm not telling my loved one what to do. Then I know I'm reaching my goal of this change behavior. And then at the end, coming up with some things that could interfere with their plan, and so they can anticipate these situations ahead of time. And there will be obstacles. Every plan that somebody wants to carry out a change behavior, there's definitely going to come with obstacles. So maybe if I don't attend my support group, or I don't reach out for help when I need help, or I don't maintain healthy boundaries, this is not going to allow me to make these behavioral changes. So identifying where they know these things may happen is important, because then they can anticipate that ahead of time. All right. Let's move on to a kind of a different scenario that is not related to the previous one. Clarifying boundaries. So we talked last week about how important boundaries is, and maintaining boundaries, and what is a boundary and what is not a boundary. Remember, a boundary is a guideline that person has identified for themselves that impacts them. So it's not telling the loved one or the other person, because it can work both ways, how to live their life, what choices to make, what actions to make. That's not a boundary. But when a boundary is protection, that if somebody else is interfering with your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, and it's impacting you, then you need to communicate and establish boundaries with that person. So for this scenario here, you have, I would like to meet my brother who has been actively using for 5 years. And his wife has recently kicked him out of his house, and he has been living with at different friends' homes. He has asked to live with me, but I'm not comfortable with that since I have small children at home. So last week we talked about a good tool to help clarify boundaries and make that boundary request. Is called this want, willing, won't tool. And it's really good when the person is not sure what is an appropriate boundary, how to communicate that, make that request, and then maintain it. So walking someone through this tool can be very effective, because basically what it does is help guide that person to what won't they tolerate? What are they willing to tolerate in order to pursue what they really want in this situation? And when that is very clear to them, they're going to have an easier time communicating, maintaining that, and setting those boundaries with that person. So remember, this tool is basically a set of reflection questions. So taken from that scenario that I just showed on the previous slide, that the loved one has asked the CSO if they could live with them. And the CSO, no, is not comfortable with that because they have small children and they don't want their brother coming in to live with them because they know it won't be a good, healthy situation for that family. So when you walk the CSO through the situation, you would ask them, what do you want from the situation? You've got this request here, and what is it that you want? And, so there could be several different, ones depending on the situation, but an appropriate one would be something like, I want my family and myself safe and secure in my own home. That's an appropriate want. So looking at this, we're having them reflect on what they would be willing to tolerate. Maybe they're not crazy about doing it, but they'll deal with it and carry out those strategies or those that plan. They're not totally against it, and having them reflect on it. So some examples like that would be, I'd be okay with my brother being upset with me when I give them that boundary request. I know they're going to be angry, and I'm going to accept that. I don't like it, but that's the way it's going to be. Or I'm willing to meet my brother each week for lunch just to check in with him and see how he's doing. I'm busy, but I'm willing to do that and take that hour or so out of my busy schedule because he is important to me and I want to know how he's doing. Or I'm willing to purchase maybe groceries one time a week and give him some basic food items that I know he would need. Or I'm willing to take time out and research some options of treatment or places to live. So of course this will vary with each situation, but having that person put together that list of what the things they would be willing to do. And then the last reflection is, what won't they do? What won't they tolerate at all? And, things like, I'm not going to stay in the conversation. My brother's verbally abusive to me after I provide this boundary request or statement. I'm not going to allow my brother to live in my home. So now this person has a guide so that when they meet with their brother, they will inform this person that they're not going to be able to live with them. But if I can help you out in researching some options, or I'd like to meet with you each week for lunch, and I could bring some groceries along, let me know your favorite food items. I'd be happy to do that. That serves as that guide to providing that boundary request and clearly making it very clear the option of living with me is not on the table. And how they respond, that's the other person's problem. That is not the person that makes the boundary request. Remember that. I know that he or she may feel bad, but that's not their issue. The issue they have to go back to is, what do they want out of this situation? And they want their family to be safe and secure at home. And that probably is not going to happen if they allow the brother to come and live with them. So great little tool to help for those that are just not sure how to handle that and what boundary requests to make. Any questions, feel free, please, to throw those in the chat box if you have questions too. Okay, let's do another scenario. My partner's been doing very well in the recovery efforts, but every time I leave to go on a business trip, they start to drink. I get so upset when my partner calls me and they are under the influence. So we talked about a tool that helps handle emotional upsets. What's the tool that would work? You remember from last week? That handles emotional upsets. When you get really upset over a situation. Good tool to recommend to a person that finds themselves.
The ABC,
Yep.
the
Yeah, absolutely, Christy. Yep. And that's perfect. That is a good tool to introduce and help this anyone who's upset about a particular situation that occurred. So it'd look a little bit like this. The activating event is a partner calls when the CSO is away on a business trip and they're under the influence. That's what you started, the emotional rage. But then the person also needs to reflect on, what are your thoughts and beliefs? What is your brain telling you about this situation? You know, it's my fault because I'm away. You know, this happens when I travel. Because I'm not watching over and I'm not controlling my partner's actions, you know, my partner went back to use it. You know, so all these thoughts, and they should list these, and there's usually several of them, and that their brain is telling them why they're really upset. Again, remember, it's not just the event, it's all those other unhelpful and irrational thinking our brain will do in times of stress. And of course, you know, listing, how do they feel? Anxious and fearful, you know, making sure that they label their feelings. And, you know, concern or mad, whatever it is, they will put those down. So disputing those irrational beliefs, you know, really challenging the thinking that they're doing towards the situation, that's what's really important to help them change their emotions to the situation. So what would be one effective question to dispute those beliefs? What would, looking at what they're thinking right now, it's my fault. This is always happening when I travel because I'm not watching over my partner's actions. What would be a great dispute to this thinking? Remember, the challenging their thoughts is helpful. Things like, you know, where's the evidence it's my fault? Really, am I responsible for my loved one's actions? They are an adult. I can't be responsible. And is it true that this always happens when I travel? The key to this exercise and helping with changing our emotional response is that effective disputing those rational beliefs. We all have them. So going through this process can be extremely helpful, because the goal here is now to decrease our anxiety, decrease our fear. And when we do that effectively with that dispute, we can have new thinking, effective new thinking. Things like, yeah, yes, it was disappointing to see my loved one under the influence, but this is not my fault. Or we are all responsible for our own behavior. I can't control the actions of others. Or when this often happens when I travel, but not every time. So when the person starts to have these different thoughts and different beliefs, that helps them see this whole situation in a different light instead of that very narrow vision of this is my fault. It's all my fault because I did not watch and I did not control, and they're all angry with themselves. So the effective disputing helps them again see it in a different light, and hopefully decreases that anxiety and fearfulness or whatever feelings that they're having about this event. Simple tool, and also very effective that you can use with your individuals that you're working with. Remember, we talked about this is good for everybody. This is good for when you have that aggravating coworker. So, or a situation that happens, use this tool and you'll find that that works for you. So last week we talked about pious communication, and remember we talked that, P stands for positive, trying to be positive, stop all the negative talking, just smile. Starting a sentence with an I statement instead of you, because that shows blame and criticizing. I is just stating how I'm feeling. You understanding statements. So you do that by listening and reflective listening, and that can be helpful, asking those open-ended questions, and then sharing responsibility, meaning finding solutions that the two of you come together with and feel like you both can do. Sharing that responsibility instead of saying, I'm right, you're wrong, I'll just do it my way type of attitude. And that all decreases the defensiveness and promotes that collaboration efforts instead of the confrontation. So helping individuals with this new way of communicating, because it will be a struggle in the beginning, because they're so used to responding a certain way. So you would like to help them through the process ahead of time and let them walk them through this process so that they can practice what they're going to say. And that can be very helpful for them to build confidence before they actually have this conversation with the person they're having it with. So having them think of what specific behavior do I want to talk about and address? Was it driving under the influence the other day? Or was it calling me when you were under the influence? Was it stealing items from my purse? Whatever it is, the specific behavior that you want to address with that person, have them state that out and put that on like a sheet of paper. And then have them think about when is the best time to have this conversation. This is really critical. We strongly discourage, in fact, it's never effective to have this conversation when the person's under the influence. Number one, they may not remember it. Two, they're only going to be argumentative and more increased argumentative, more agitated. So do not do this when they're under the influence. But maybe, after they've had their morning coffee, or maybe after the kids are in bed, or, maybe there's a time of the day that the loved one is more calm. Pick that time that that would be good and plan that time to have that conversation. And this is key. You don't want a conversation when, they're coming home from work and things are stressful and someone's trying to get, dinner on the table. That's not a good time to have that conversation. So pick a time that's it's very calm. Have them think about some positive statements that they can start this conversation with, like driving under the influence. I love you very much and you mean a lot to me, our children, and this is why I want to share my thoughts here. That person's going to listen because you immediately started with, you mean a lot to me. I love you very much. And then making sure that they use the I statements. So I remember just is implying my concerns, my feelings, my thoughts, and it doesn't lay blame or criticizing. We're not saying, how could you have drove home under the influence? What we're saying is, I was so concerned about your safety when I saw that you were under the influence and drove home, or I was frightened to see that. So just sharing your feelings and your thoughts, that's going to be better heard from that person than if you lay blame and criticize their behavior. Wait and listen to their response. You may only say a couple sentences, and maybe the first time you do this, they say nothing. Accept that and have that, plan it again, do it at another time. And especially if it happens again. When they feel comfortable to speak, they will. And reflect back on what you heard. That's powerful, that reflective listening. Try to listen, ask questions, non-judgmental type questions, not like, how could you have done that type of thing. And saying statements like, boy, this must be very difficult for you, or making comments that you've heard them reflect about, or that maybe they said they were sorry about that. And you could respond, I know you don't want to hurt yourself or anybody else. I certainly understand that. That can be very powerful, and saying those statements. And then ending with, what could be, how could we move forward here? What could be something that you agree, would you call me, or we agree that if we go out, you would call it Uber, taxi, whatever, what would be the plan here? Let's come to a solution together that we both agree on. And that could be very impactful and helpful for both parties. Always important to end the conversation with a positive statement. Thanks for talking with me, or I appreciate you listening to my concerns. That can be very powerful too. So the person would have this all planned out and would practice this. Encourage that person to practice saying this, because they will get nervous. They'll feel uncomfortable having this conversation. So they want to make sure that these words flow off their tongue real as easy as possible. Okay. Developing reflective listening skills. Very important communication skill. We talked about this last week. So saying things, starter phrases, when you hear your loved one speaking about a situation, making sure non-judgmentally you're saying it. Oh, so you feel like you're ready to look at some treatment options, or it sounds like you're very concerned about the situation, or you're wondering if going to these meetings are helpful. You're concerned about your health. Anything like that can be very helpful. And just reflecting back on what that person's saying. So, for example, a person says, and I know we're running a little bit out of time here, so I'll just share these comments. They say, my partner's so controlling. They want to tell me how to live my life. So a good response would be, it sounds like you're very frustrated with your partner and their controlling behaviors. Again, you're just repeating what they've said. The whole goal here is to allow that person to continue to reflect and not shut them down. That's the goal. You want them to reflect so you get an understanding of what they're thinking. Or I get so angry when my loved one steals from me. It's sad. It makes me sad knowing that I can't trust my loved one. Again, it must be very upsetting to have that person you're close to stealing from you. I can understand how hard this would be. So this, again, is showing absolutely no judgment at all. And it allows that person to further reflect. And one more of related to communication here is listening for the person to talk about change. That can be very, it's a day that the CSO always waits for. They want to hear that change talk. And it's a lot like reflective listening, but you want them to try to help them connect the dots. They're trying to make a change, thinking they need to make a change, and maybe hopefully encourage them to make those changes. So something like if the loved one says, I'm really feeling depressed, I don't have a decent job, a response, an appropriate response may be, so I'm hearing what you're saying is you'd like a better job. Sounds like your drug use is getting in the way. What are your thoughts about quitting for a while so that you can get a better job? Again, nothing judgmental here, just getting their thoughts. Or it was really frightening to see my friend overdose last night. And instead of saying, well, I bet it was, you could be next, that would be inappropriate and using judgment. A better response to that would be like, I bet that was frightening to see that your friend overdose. Would you like to share your thoughts or your concerns? That can be very helpful. And then, just a simple statement, I wonder if I should go back to school, Going back to school will certainly help you get a better job. But what are your thoughts and your concerns? Do you have any plans? You know, again, the key is to getting them to talk a bit more and reflect instead of telling them what to do. And that can be very hard for a person that's used to telling someone else what to do. It takes time, but it's certainly doable. So I like to end this session today with, like, how I end my Smart Recovery meetings is, what is your one takeaway from like last week or today's Smart Recovery sessions that we've carried? You know, what topic or tool was most meaningful for you, or something that was said that was your takeaway? Please share that in the chat box. And as you do that, I'm going to remind everyone about the resources that we have available for CSOs that they can share with the individuals that you work with. So the Smart Recovery Family and Friends Handbook, again, go over all the tools, very helpful, how to implement them in any type of situation. And I think, you know, they cover all those tools, and I think it's a helpful book to have. Getting your loved one sober is great for those individuals that tend to nag and plead and yell, and learn what alternatives there are. The Beyond Addiction book is good because it really comes from the focus of kindness, and positive reinforcement is really what can help someone change. There is the craft resources out there, and I love the craft resources. They're free, except for the course. They're very helpful. They're very practical. They're simple, and they can be implemented in all situations. They even separate these 20-minute guides out from partner to parent guide, and they can be implemented, like I said, in all situations. We have to remind our CSOs that we're working with that they are in a position to have enormous influence over the loved ones. So when they can learn a different way to respond, it can change a situation, change the dynamics of the relationship. And then the two new books that came out, Beyond Addiction Workbook for Family and Friends and The Invitation to Change. Great resources. It really walks that person through on how to help their loved one make a behavior change and influence them. So great resources, and I hope you find these resources helpful. Please share them with individuals that you know that are struggling because they have a loved one that has an addiction disorder. There are tools out there. They can change the situation. And you know, these tools are very impactful. So thank you all for being here. And I really enjoyed being here these last 2 weeks and sharing the Smart Recovery tools, in particular for family and friends. And I will open it up to any type of comments or any questions that you may have that I didn't answer in these last 2 weeks. Feel free to, whoops, let me see if I have anything in the chat box. You share anything.
Hey, Shirley, I see your hand raised. If you want
I
to come
just
up.
want to thank you. I am a coach here at Boyd County Detention Center. Got 12 years of sobriety under my belt, personal long-term recovery, and I've been a part of a lot of different fellowships. I've been through NAAA, different things like that, but I find that this Smart Recovery is probably my favorite of all, and it's because I'm a firm believer in change your thoughts, change your actions, and a lot of it uses CBT and the REBT, and it's basically about changing your thought process, because I think I can only speak for me, but for me, that was my problem, was the way I saw and analyze things, my emotions towards certain things in my life. So I'm just grateful for it. I use also the Successful Life Skills book from Smart Recovery. I use that to teach out of a lot too, and it just really breaks things down. So love. I love Smart Recovery.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Shirley, because it's really helpful to hear that too. And what you were talking about comes down to self-empowerment. That's what really creates change. nobody wants to be told how to change or how specifically ways you need to change. We want to come to our own conclusions. And you do that by using these tools and practicing these tools. So that was great to hear, and congratulations on 12 years. That's wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else here? Oh, you're welcome, Tasha and Jamie. Yeah, so if you have any further questions, reach out and I'd be happy to spend time or talk to you or, in an email conversation, whatever. So feel free to reach out to me, and thank you everyone for being here today.